Sean White. Please stand up. Introduce yourself, please.
Diane Birch, World of Possibilities, local author and speaker, and an advocate for animal welfare.
Brittany Clark, I'm with Forgotten.
Karen Borden, Dixie Ducks and Rescue, and an animal advocate for No Kill Huntsville.
Susan Burlingame from Challenger's House.
I'm Aubrey Kavanaugh. I manage a website called pauseforchange.com. It's an educational website.
June Douglas, with No Kill Huntsville.
Beverly Desenberg with North Alabama Spay Neuter Clinic.
Awesome. Thank you very much. The group also includes Nina from What's my next comment? Nina couldn't be here today, but she's definitely represented. We are very excited to hold this workshop today because we believe Huntsville can be the first no-kill community in Alabama. There are 150 no-kill communities that represent some 400 cities across our nation. There is nothing those cities don't have that Huntsville doesn't have. And we really believe we can do this. So we are very excited to have Mike Fry and Kelly Jedlicki. They are experts in this. They have traveled the country teaching other groups and communities just like ours how to go no-kill. They're experts in the no-kill equation, and we are very excited that they've given their time and efforts to come see us today. Thank you so much. One last comment, if you have cell phones, please turn them on vibrate, and if you need to speak with someone, please step out of the room. With that, I'll hand you over.
Well, welcome. Again, my name is Mike Fry, and I just have to start by letting you all know that I am incredibly thrilled to be here, and when I say that, I mean I am incredibly thrilled to be here for lots of reasons. First of all, I love spending time with people who are in the process of making history, and I do believe that that's exactly what's happening in Huntsville right now. No-kill has spread across the United States faster than any other social change movement that I know of. And we're going to talk about more of the details of that in a little bit. But really, when you take that in, what the No Kill Huntsville folks are doing are changing history in Huntsville. And it is always an inspiration for me to be in the room with people who are doing it. I get to be up in the front of the room for much of the day. So does Kelly, but the people who are going to do it are the people in No Kill Huntsville and the rest of you who are in the room. And I'm just really excited and blessed to be able to be here today, sharing in that experience with you. I just realized I haven't turned my clicker on yet, so I'm not going to do that. I have to also say an extra special thank you to the sponsors. We can't thank them enough. There they are on the screen. An amazing group of people. If they hadn't done incredible work in communications, in graphics, in outreach to the public, we wouldn't have a packed room here today. We wouldn't have been on all the TV stations and the newspapers throughout the last couple of weeks. They have done an absolutely stellar job. So I would like to give them another round of applause. And a short note about time. We are packing about 6 hours worth of information and material into 4 hours. And then we're going to have some breaks in there too. So we're going to be moving really, really fast. So if you think I'm talking fast now, wait until we get going later. So brace yourselves. What that also means is that we're going to structure our time fairly specifically. We're going to talk for about an hour. I'm going to talk for a half hour. Then Kelly's going to talk for a half hour. And then we're going to have our first break. And it's going to be a relatively brief break, so we're going to want you to manage your time during that break fairly carefully. You're going to have homework during the break. So then when we return from breaks, we're going to tell you what time to be back from the break. We're going to want you to be very judicious about getting back and getting in your seats and being ready to go, because we are going to be moving it really fast, so just so you know. And the breaks will be relatively short. So just a word of warning, the restrooms are thankfully right outside the hallway. We are going to have Q&A, but we're going to have very limited time for it. And so we're going to want some structure around the Q&A. So you've all got pieces of paper and pens. there's a Q&A box, and the No Kill Huntsville folks are collecting the questions that we'll collect. At the very end, we will go through the Q&A. Kelly and I will do our best to do that. If there are any questions that we can't answer live now, we'll actually be writing down all the questions and the answers and posting them as a note on the No Kill Huntsville Facebook page. So we want to make sure every question is answered. And that gets us into the topic of no kill. And the first thing that we have to know is understand what is it exactly that we're talking about. No kill, some people think that that means no animal ever loses its life at an animal shelter, and that's not true. That's not what we're talking about. We believe fully in humane euthanasia as it was originally defined, meaning to end the suffering of a terminally ill animal. The problem is we have perfectly healthy and treatable animals that are being killed in shelters, and the humane movement has in effect co-opted the word euthanasia. We're trying to take that back by saying humane euthanasia, okay, killing healthy and treatable animals, not okay. And what we're talking about is not no-kill shelters. No-kill shelters are great. They've been around for decades. What we're talking about are making entire no-kill communities. And what that means is collectively all the organizations and shelters within that community save at least 90%. Because if you look at the statistics across the United States, that's pretty much the threshold. The terminal animals that have been hit by cars or road peaks that are beyond savable, those animals are euthanized. The dangerous animals are euthanized. Everything else makes it out of the shelter alive, and that terminal or dangerous category typically makes up less than 10%. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about no-kill. We're not talking about hoarding. We're not talking about warehousing. We're not talking about, keeping a critically ill animal on life support for years. It means we're really saving every savable pet from an open admission animal, all of the open admission animal control centers, which is a pretty remarkable feat. A little about who I am and why I'm up here presenting this to you. I'm the executive director at Animal Ark Animal Shelter, which was the first no-kill shelter in Minnesota. My family founded Animal Ark, so I've actually been in this conversation since 1977. I know you don't think I look that old, but I am. And we also founded the first no-kill communities in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So we've been there and done it repeatedly, and we've been helping other people do it too. I'm also co-host of the weekly Animal Wise radio program. And I'll tell you this right up front. As host of that show, I've had the great privilege of talking to shelter directors all over the United States who've gone from the old way of doing sheltering to the new way of doing sheltering. And whenever we talk to them and ask them, would you ever go back? Not one ever says yes. What we're talking about here is a dramatic shift that's happening in animal sheltering and animal control that is nothing but good, positive news. So you're expected to be happy and partying and celebrating today because that's what's coming to Huntsville. A brief history. On June 1, 2001, there were 0 no-kill communities in the United States. 0. There were lots of no-kill shelters. There were 0 no-kill communities. That all changed on June 11 of 2001 when Tompkins County, New York became the first no-kill community in the United States. So then there was 1. Today, in that period of time, there are now 160. Notice Michelle gave slightly different numbers when she talked. The number is changing so fast right now we can barely keep up. The last time I was in Huntsville, which was just a few months ago, the number was 100. Now it's 160. And since some of those communities are actually counties, the numbers of cities are now up to 400 or 500 cities in the United States that are no longer killing healthy or treatable animals in the shelters. The growth of this movement has been spectacular. And so the bottom line is not only do we know that it can be done, it's being done all over the place. In the north, the south, the east, the west, red states, blue states, wealthy communities, poor communities, the model is the same. For those of you who picked up the book Redemption, that is available for free, the first 42 people who came, the detailed story of how that got started is in the book. It also details some of the programs that we're going to talk about in breathtaking detail. This book is why this movement is happening. So read it, digest it, share it with your friends. It is the roadmap that we're following. And here's just a handful of some of the cities that we are talking about that are no-kill. Every single one of those cities has a really different kind of history or story about how they got to no-kill. The exact approaches that they took are different. The programs are all the same. And throughout the day today, I'm going to share with you some of their stories. Every single one of them is remarkable. This is one of my absolute all-time favorite stories that I like to tell, and it's Seagoville, Texas. This is Carl Bailey, who ended up being in charge of animal control in Seagoville, Texas. He's a veteran police officer, and actually, I think what I'll do is I'll let him tell you the first part of the story.
So, had Tom decided that he wanted to bring animal services back into the police department. At the time, it was under code enforcement. And I kind of cautioned him against that because of the problems we've had in the past. You know, it's a big public nightmare. They call in and complain about it. So I didn't know if he wanted to take that on, but anyway, he said, yeah, we're going to take it on, and I want you to run it. I'm like, really? You know? I don't have any experience running animal shelter. He said, well, you're the dog. So that's how I ended up with it. I told him it had to be no kill, because there was no way I could put down healthy animals, and just because we couldn't find a home. So we were going to have to do that. And they said, well, if you can do it, do it. I said, well, prepare yourself, because that's where we're going.
Okay, to be clear, so what's hidden in that is he'd never run an animal control shelter before, didn't have any animal technical expertise whatsoever, and they put him in charge of animal control. If you talk to him in detail, he said he knew the term no-kill because he heard it out and about in the field, but he didn't know what it was. He didn't know that there's actually 11 programs that make up the no-kill equation that you have to follow to get there. He just knew there was this thing out there in the universe called no-kill, and he wanted to do it. And so the story goes, he started his job, day one, walks into animal control, where they were still killing about 80% using a gas chamber. He walks in at 9 o'clock in the morning. At 9:01, he tells the staff, we're closing the gas chamber, dismantle the gas chamber. At 9:02, he said the killing stops right now. And it did. Here's what else Carl Bailey has to say about how they finished out that first year. And so the first year after you took the job, what was your safe rate?
97.5%, almost 98%.
Wow.
And he didn't even know what he was doing. I mean, he didn't. I mean, he literally felt his way through, and he made the commitment that we're not going to kill healthy animals, and so he felt his way through. And what he ended up finding was the no-kill equation. When the shelter got full and more animals were coming in, they said, well, what do we do? They said, well, I don't know. Maybe we could bring some out to the little strip mall, and it turns out the pharmacy there let them set up a little adoption tent at the front door, and suddenly they were doing off-site adoptions, and animals were moving out, and they found and felt their way through the no-kill equation because they had made the commitment that they were not going to kill those animals. And so I will tell you, every single city, that every one of those 150, 160 communities has a leader that made that commitment, made that decision, and the stories are fascinating. Which is, by the way, the other reason I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, because when I do this work, I get to bump up and rub elbows with these amazing people. This movement is filled with absolutely brilliant people. That is what the actual equation is. Very simple, trap, neuter, return for free roaming cats. comprehensive adoption programs, low-cost spay-neuter, rescue groups, and by the way, low-cost spay-neuter, super important. We're not going to talk a lot about it today, because if anything, it's the program that has been most emphasized in this movement. People have thought spay-neuter alone will fix it, and so we've spayed and neutered and spayed and neutered and spayed and neutered. But in most communities, it hasn't made much difference. We're going to talk about why, and why spay-neuter is still really important, but why we don't really have to talk about it quite so much anymore. Working cooperatively with rescue groups in the rescue community, foster care programs, pet retention programs, rehabilitation of sick or behavior-challenged dogs and cats, new ways of engaging the public. I mean, for years, shelters and animal control have been yelling at the public for being so irresponsible. You folks are so bad. All of the messaging pretty much has been around that. You're irresponsible. You don't spay and neuter. Your dog's running loose. You're bad, you're bad, you're bad. Well, how can you engage the public to come and help you when you're constantly scolding them? We're going to talk a lot more about that and other ways that we can work with the community to get their support for the life-saving efforts. Volunteers, proactive redemption, a compassionate director, which some will argue is probably the most important thing. I think Carl Bailey pretty much showed us that. Trap, neuter, release, when we go through the rest of the detail of today, we're not going to talk a ton about trap, neuter, release. You already have a great group of folks doing TNR here. I would argue the only thing you need at animal control to do is work cooperatively with them. Connect to those TNR programs so that free-roaming feral cats aren't ending up at animal control and in the euthanasia room. There's no reason for that to happen because you've got free TNR services available in your community already. I mean, that's like a no-brainer that could be solved tomorrow. Comprehensive adoption programs. Kelly is going to get into a lot of detail talking about that in a bit. And this slide really kind of talks about why those adoption programs are so important. And it also talks a little about why spay-neuter is important but will never solve the problem. The math that's on the screen, the percent of intact versus the percent of spay-neuter, is actual real-world data. It's the average in the United States. The average city has about 79% that are already spayed and neutered and 21% that are intact. The majority of pets are coming into the population from commercial sources, including breeders, pet shops, puppy mills. They've got their spay-neuter programs up and running, and that's kind of very few adoptions generally. And as a result of that, on average, 25 animals per 1,000 residents end up coming into the animal shelter. That's the little output balloon on the lower right-hand corner. By only changing one factor, and that is the numbers of animals that are adopted versus the number of animals that come from commercial sources, the entire picture changes. Because if you think about what an adoption is, it's the placement of a spayed and neutered animal into that home. So it's just like spay-neuter, except for you're also saving an animal out of the shelter at the same time, and you're preventing those people from buying from a puppy mill or pet shop or other breeder. So that one transaction is getting you it's like a threefer. It's a really good thing. And as a result, the percentage of animals in the population in your are important. Still have to do the spay-neuter program, but when you do that, in those cities that do it really well, the per capita intake to the shelters drops to 10 animals per 1,000 people. And if you think 1,000 people can't save 10 animals, I mean, that's like a no-brainer, right? And that's just the raw data. That's the raw statistics. And that's why the adoption programs are so critical. They get you everything. There's a whole enchilada can get fixed right there. Again, we're not going to talk too much about those low-cost spay-neuter programs. Keep them going, keep them going. They're really great. But we are already doing them. We don't have to beat that anymore. Working cooperatively with rescue groups, and that just doesn't mean let the rescue groups have access. That means have outstanding relationships with those rescue groups. And if you've got an animal sitting in your shelter that's at risk of going into the euthanasia room, you call those rescue groups, you email those rescue groups, and you proactively work to get those animals out of the shelter to those rescue groups. And again, we're going to be talking about all of these programs in real depth later on. Foster homes, critically important. We're going to talk a lot about Austin, Texas. One of the first things Austin, Texas did was Dr. Ellen Jefferson said, I want to adopt and save every single bottle baby from animal control. And to give you a sense of the scope of the problem they had at that time, there were 2,000 neonate bottle babies going through animal control in Austin every year. 2,000. Think about that. And she said, the first commitment Austin Texas made was, we're going to get every single one of those bottle babies out alive. And obviously what they needed to do was seriously ramp up their foster programs. And they did it. And we're going to talk more about how they did it and what that does. Pet retention, probably the most overlooked and also one of the other most important parts of the program. I'm going to go through that in detail with you a little bit later. I believe pet retention is, well, I would say it's the most important thing in the entire equation, because we say to people, you should be responsible for your pets. You should make pet ownership a lifelong commitment. Then we make it super easy for them to get rid of their pets, and then we just kill them for them. I mean, what are we teaching the kids when we do that? We're teaching the kids all the wrong things. And if we want to actually create a community that worships and honors and cares for and tends our companion animals, we have to model that behavior. You know, and if anybody here doesn't believe that instilling a kind of proper care of their animals is not animal control's job, then I would like to talk to you about why afterwards. I've never met anybody who didn't believe that, but in fact what we're doing is teaching them the opposite. And so these pet retention programs can help actually instill that in our communities. Very important. Rehabilitation. I'm not going to say much about that other than to show you a little video. Rehabilitation covers every possible medical behavior issue in the world. Just about. At Animal Art, for example, you know, we treat parvovirus, and we have a 95% survival rate with parvovirus. Every medical issue, every behavior issue, just because it's fun, I'm going to play you some of this video and describe what you're seeing. This is part of our assessment and rehabilitation program for behavior challenged dogs. And I'll explain what's happening as it goes through. Nearly every dog in this video was either deemed dog aggressive. One of them was actually deemed a dangerous dog. Boy, aren't they dangerous? Look how scary. Where's Kramer? He's the dangerous one. I mean, come on. And I will admit that most of these dogs, if you have them in a dog kennel in a stressful environment at an animal shelter, you know, they'll be all freaked out and scared, and they'll bark at each other in their kennels. But if you get them out to a nice, beautiful park and like a play area like we have at Animal Art, this is what they do instead. So obviously, none of these dogs actually have any behavior problems. They're simply acting in the dog kennel as scared, frightened dogs. Oh, the white one, that's a Spot. She's got one spot right here. So we call her Spot. And she was in the kennel. She's one scary, scary dog. But look at her when she gets outside. So play groups not only are therapeutic for the dogs, you can actually get them outside and you can, in an unconfronted way, an unconfronting way, really sit back and assess the dog's behavior so that you can get a better judge of who these dogs really are. I mean, obviously, all of these dogs are perfectly capable of being placed in homes, and every single one of these dogs would be dead if we didn't have this program. Hey, watch, it's coming up. This is really funny. He's like, I'm long enough. Let me in, let me in. Okay, so if you have not already figured out that no kill is actually way more fun, because it actually is. I mean, what's more fun? That, or hauling those dogs into the euthanasia room and putting them down? I mean, think about it. Last time I was in Huntsville, I had people, from animal control, really being honest and open, and I feel bad for them. But they said, "I'm exhausted and tired." Well, wouldn't you be? I mean, this is engaging and exciting and invigorating, not exhausting. Running a little short on time and have to move really quick here. Sorry, Kelly. Volunteers, I don't have to say a whole heck of a lot about volunteers. We all know they can come in and work at the shelter for free. They're like free labor. And so we're going to talk more about the dollars and cents of no kill in a little bit, but volunteers are a great way to offset any cost that you might get and actually save yourself some money. Proactive redemption. Wow, we're going to hear from the absolute national rock star of proactive redemption. How do you get lost pets back to their families without them even coming into the shelter? There are shelters that are doing that up to the level of 94% of the animals, and most of them don't ever even have to come to the shelter. I mean, let that sink in. That saves the city money, saves animals' lives, builds goodwill with the community, helps you encourage people to license their pets so your license compliance goes way up. There's absolutely no bad news about proactive redemption. It's all good news. It's also a rock-solid business model. And of course, the last of the pieces is the compassionate director, and you'll be surprised how much I have to say about that. That will sort of wrap things up before we get to Q&A. So really, it's that simple. Some people will like to think that no kill is some sort of controversy. But if you look at the programs, there's absolutely nothing controversial about it. In fact, I would argue most people, if they were to look at the programs, they would think, wow, that's the kind of stuff our shelters should be doing. That's the kind of stuff we want to be supporting. And so that basically is it in a nutshell. I covered this really briefly along the way, so I'll go really fast through it. But bottom line is, no kill saves the city money because holding and killing animals is 100% revenue negative. There's nothing cost effective about it at all. The average cost of taking in, holding, and killing an animal is about $100. So if you don't have to kill it, if you give it to a rescue, that saves you money. If you release to a TNR organization, that saves you money. If you engage in proactive redemption, you don't have to house the animal at all. Saves you money, and it generates revenue because you can still give the person a citation for the running at large. So you've got money, and you didn't have to spend any. And just a real quick note, in disaster response, the programs work exactly the same. And I don't like to necessarily call it disaster response. I like to call it rapid response or crisis response because that can look like a whole bunch of different things. It's not always a disaster. Sometimes it's a puppy mill being shut down. Sometimes it's a dog fight bust. That's happening. Animal Arc has been involved in a whole host of different things. Probably the biggest one was Hurricane Katrina. We actually brought 250 animals back from New Orleans to Minnesota. During that, and spent 8,000 hours with our volunteers, boots on the ground in New Orleans during that process. I can tell you, we've never had to violate or change any of our no-kill philosophies ever. Largest dog fight bust we ever worked on was 200 dogs. 200 dog fight dogs. one dog out of 200 was euthanized for severe behavior, one. And I could go on with animal hoarding, but it really is all the same. You just have to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more flexible because you're acting and responding to a big issue really fast. So in a nutshell, that is what the no-kill equation is. Those are some of the communities, and we're here to celebrate the making of another one. So that's the big picture of what no-kill is. Now, Kelly Jedlicki is going to come up. She's from No Kill Shelby County, and she's going to show you exactly what no-kill looks like in a rural southern community. Big round of applause for Kelly.